This episode is brought to you by INSKIN Cosmedics. Hello and welcome to the Beauté by ABIC podcast, your online support community for the aesthetic and beauty industry. Here, we are strengthening and unifying the industry through representation, innovation, and education. This is a platform created and dedicated to the aesthetic and beauty industry, valuing unity and advancement. We serve to represent, support, and inspire you by connecting you with industry experts, expanding your knowledge through educational pieces, and bringing you the latest industry news. This is Beauté by ABIC. I'm your host, Stephanie Miller, and today's guest is Michelle Sciara from INSKIN. INSKIN Cosmedics National Education Manager Michelle Sciara has dedicated over 23 years to refining her craft as a holistic beauty industry expert. Michelle's deep love for sharing knowledge and inspiring long-lasting passion in other therapists industry-wide is the culmination of 14 years spent in clinic working both as an aesthetician and a multi-site clinic and team manager, as well as a further 9 years specialising in customer service, sales as a business development manager, and education. From INSKIN, today we welcome Michelle Sciara. Welcome back to the podcast, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Steph. Thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure to have you on. And obviously today we're talking about skin needling and all things skin. But before we do, we would love you just to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be in the industry for those who haven't heard you on our podcast before.
Absolutely, with pleasure, Steph. I've been in the industry for just on 20 years now, and I've been super lucky to experience so many different aspects of the industry. You know, from working for somebody, running clinics in Sydney CBD, working for some of the top clinics, managing teams, and working my way through to INSKIN Cosmetics where I am now. And I've been very blessed to have a wonderful career, and I've experienced everything from working in HQ and customer experience. I've done sales and field roles, working with salons, education, and now in the position that I am now, which is the National Education Manager with INSKIN Cosmetics.
That's a very lucky career, especially working with INSKIN. I hear it's so fun working over there.
It is. It's amazing. And it was one of those dreams years ago, if I'm honest, where I used to, look up to the people that used to look after us, and Marie and Nicoccioloni was one of them. And I say, wow, what an amazing person, what an amazing team. I wish I could do that one day. And it was, once upon a time, a goal and a dream that I thought would never come true, and, work hard. And now I get to work and play hard at the same time.
Oh, a dream come true for sure. Well, today we're talking about skin needling. And the first thing that comes to mind on this topic is product ingredient infusion. So our first question for you is, why is it so important to use specialised serums when you're infusing during a skin needling treatment?
Steph, this was such an important topic when we decided to do this for us, because it's actually something that I see come up quite a lot in our industry and on forums and threads, and I think it's an important one to talk about. When it comes to infusing ingredients and working with topical ingredients, I think sometimes what therapists can misunderstand is that just because something has been designed topically for safe topical application, it doesn't mean it's going to be safe to infuse. When we're applying ingredients to the surface of our skin, it's a very different response. There's, a lot of different strong, big actives that can be applied to the surface of the skin. But when we're working with microneedling, we are creating these tiny little microchannels, essentially little micro traumas in the skin. And those topical ingredients aren't necessarily going to work and respond in the same way when they're being infused into essentially a little micro wound. So it's really important that we're using the right ingredients in the right doses and in the right forms to be able to support the skin through microneedling safely.
And what would those right ingredients be? I mean, there's so many things involved. There's ingredients, but there's also molecular weights and other considerations as well when it comes to actually infusing into the skin.
Yeah, that's a really important point too. We often talk about with INSKIN Cosmetics, we work with the Dermapen 4 system and DP Dermaceuticals. And when we talk about ingredients, and one of the key ingredients is vitamin C, that is, a foundation ingredient for skin. But as we know in our industry, there are so many different forms of vitamin C. So if we compare something like L-ascorbic acid, for example, with magnesium ascorbophosphate, L-ascorbic acid is a fantastic ingredient when applied topically in the skin, but it doesn't mean that it's going to work the same way when it's microneedled. It can actually be quite aggravating, quite irritating. And that's why when you're considering infusing substances into the skin, you've got to consider the form. So magnesium ascorbophosphate, for example, with vitamin C, it's a very stable, a very gentle form of vitamin C. So it means that we can still use those ingredients just in the forms that are going to be well suited to the skin while it's going through this regeneration, while it's had this micro trauma being applied to the skin. Another ingredient which I really love with microneedling is zinc. Zinc is such an important hero ingredient. It helps to support healing the skin, and really that's what we're trying to do. When we're performing microneedling, we're creating these micro traumas to encourage the skin to go through its natural regenerative process. So when we're infusing ingredients, we're providing the skin with the tools so that it can do it more effectively. So, choosing the right ingredients is really important. And I hear a lot of people talking about, you don't need to use ingredients, just use a basic HA. But when you think about the concept, I think supporting the skin and feeding it with those tools is really important to get the right results.
And you were just talking about hyaluronic acid and just use your HA. Tell us a little bit about it, because, I mean, people do talk about just use your HA for slip. Why is it important to then use other ingredients in combination with that?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because the HA is not just for slip. The type of HA that you use absolutely is going to give you, a more positive or negative, depending on what you choose, slip in the treatment for comfort. But the type of HA or hyaluronic acid used is really important. And you mentioned molecular weighting. Molecular weighting, for those who aren't aware, refers to the size of the molecules. And with DP Dermaceuticals, we use a triple molecular weighted Hyalufuse. And it's a complex that is actually 150 times more effective than hyaluronic acid. Now, the molecular weighting is important because essentially you'll have molecules that are larger, medium and smaller size molecules so that they can saturate the different layers of the skin. So a large molecule, for example, is really going to help reinforce the barrier and saturate the epidermis and, of course, provide glide. A medium molecular weight is really going to help support cell-to-cell communication and immunity, which is so important when it comes to skin repair and regeneration. And then a small molecular weight, you could be looking at 10, or you should be looking at around 10 kilodaltons, so that you're getting that deep penetration of actives, that delivery of actives to help support the dermis and those proteins and those structures in the epidermis. So it's really about looking at different molecules working at different layers of the skin. So it's not just a traditional hyaluronic acid.
And there's a lot of questions about safety of those larger molecular weighted ingredients. That leads us to, the risks associated with using products that are not correctly weighted. Tell us a little bit about the risks associated with using specifically designed infused products.
Risks, essentially, we want to be considering the risk of granulomas. Granulomas are essentially a form of scarring in the skin. And what most people aren't aware of is that granulomas can actually take time to develop. They don't necessarily develop instantly on the skin. They can actually develop over time. So you could be, 3, 4, 5, 6 treatments in, and then you start to present with an issue and these types of little granulomas that come up in the skin. But you also need to look at long-term inflammation. You know, we are creating a controlled inflammatory response when needling, but when you needle ingredients into the skin that aren't designed to do that, you run the risk of long-term inflammation. And we know what long-term inflammation brings. It brings, you know, disruption to the skin's integrity, to the skin's immunity, and that just has a huge knock-on effect when it comes to skin health. So it's really important that we're only working with ingredients that are designed to be infused at that level.
Absolutely. And, you know, you just sort of skimmed over the granuloma, but that's actually quite a significant issue. When you do get granulomas, how are they treated?
Granulomas are something that are really difficult to treat and reverse. And in my history and experience, I've actually never really seen a positive outcome once somebody has experienced granulomas. I mean, luckily, I haven't seen many. It's really just been cases that have been presented because our partners do work with the right ingredients. So it's not something that I have seen. And when I've seen it, it's usually when I've, you know, been asked for experience with a different system or somebody who's looked at different ingredients. So luckily enough, I haven't, but in the times that I have, there's usually medical intervention that's needed.
That's exactly right. And that's why it's so important to use the right equipment and the right products that you're infusing in the skin, because with granulomas, it is very, very difficult to get rid of granulomas, almost impossible. You do
Almost impossible, yeah.
Yeah, you do need that medical intervention and maybe excising them, and that can leave scarring and so forth. So it is something that we really should take much more seriously than just, oh, you know, it's a simple skin needling treatment. There's a lot of things associated with skin needling that we really need to consider. And that's also results as well, because obviously we're in the business of helping people and helping their skin. And so our clients want to see some outcomes. Tell us which ways you can amplify results or improve clinical outcomes when you're actually skin needling or using products to infuse.
There are so many different options, and looking into the industry now, it's really great to see clinics, you know, working at building skin programs and sort of needling skin treatments where they're, you know, adding levels and levels, which is fantastic. Some of my favorite combinations, especially with DP Dermaceuticals, we're very lucky. We have the option of working with different levels of meso infusions. So we've got our core standard infusions, and then we've got our next level, which is our MG collection. So these are the super concentrated sterile files that you can infuse to the skin.
You want the best for your skin, and INSKIN Cosmetics get it. That's why they partner with Dermapen World, who have dedicated years of research and millions of dollars into developing a skincare range to boost your microneedling results. Designed to enhance microneedling procedures, proven effectiveness for a range of skin concerns, tailored products for every step of your daily routine, and used in thousands of clinics all around the world. Inquire about your opportunity to receive your free Dermapen 4 with the purchase of your Dermapen Authorised Treatment Provider Protocol Pack at INSKIN Cosmetics.
When you're working with a range like DP Dermaceuticals, we also have a great opportunity to work with specialised peels within the needling treatment. And this is a big one because I hear a lot of clinics working with their core treatment peels in their needling treatment. But again, we need to consider that these peels are not being designed to be used with a skin needling application. So I love boosting a needling treatment with a, you know, specially formulated peel. LED is a must. It's not even a question now with skin needling, and our recommendation is always prior to the needling treatment to boost that cellular response, to boost that cellular communication. But another thing that I also want to discuss is when we're looking at combined treatments, over the years we've become very fixated on creating, you know, bigger and better treatments. But I also think we need to consider that skin needling is already doing so much to the skin in that one time. So I think sometimes we need to take a step back and think about, okay, well, the client could have needling today and then come back in 10 days and have an infusion or electroporation. So it doesn't necessarily mean a combination of therapies on the same day, but a combination of therapies within, a 3 or 6 month program. And that's how I like to work. I like to work with progressive treatments, progressive results for those long-term skin health results.
And there's a lot of question about the interval time between treatments. What's your best recommendations? And also, is it applicable to actually fluctuate the interval times? And what type of different results can you expect if you do that?
When we look at treatment times and treatment intervals, there's quite a few things that I like to consider. And one is the health of the skin. And the age of the skin. And I say the age of the skin and not of the person. That's because you can have somebody who's lived 30 years and they have skin that looks like it's lived 60 years, and then vice versa. You could have someone who's lived 60 years but then look like they have skin that's only lived, 40 or 30 years. So depending on the skin health, depending on the skin age, and then what you're treating. Generally, a condition that is more epidermal, so say, superficial acne, pigmentation, inflammation, those conditions can generally be treated a lot sooner, anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. When we're looking at conditions that reside within the dermis or deeper, so collagen induction, if we're looking at restructuring our capillary walls, scarring, those treatments tend to need a little bit longer in between. So we're looking at 6 weeks plus, so anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. And that's because we really need to allow the skin that time to transition the collagen from that young, vulnerable baby collagen into that strong structural collagen. So it really depends on the condition you're treating and then the skin health and age of the skin.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you've just said that, because the interval times are something that I think in general as a whole the industry can get a little bit confused with. And you do see blanket statements of, skin needling should be done every 4 weeks, and it's just a blanket rule, but that's really not the case. It really is dependent on the skin, on the person, and on what you're trying to treat, right? And also what combination therapies you're using in between those. So if you're using other modalities in between, you could possibly need to change the interval times. Tell us a little bit about combination treatments that you can use with skin needling right now, or treatments that you can use in the interval periods.
Oh, there's so many. This is what I love about what we do. When you're incorporating different modalities into programs, this is the beauty of it, right? You can make it what you want it to. Me personally, I love adding other forms of infusion into the mix. Electroporation is one of my favorite forms of infusion, and we call it non-needle infusion. And that's where we can continue to flood and support the skin with ingredients and actives in between those sessions, of course, respecting the time frame. I love working with enzymes. They're my favorite types of peels to work with. And, there are so many different forms of enzymes to consider, when you've got papaya, pineapple, pomegranate, and they all provide different additions, not just the exfoliation. We're talking about supporting the skin with antioxidants, with vitamins, all the extra things. It's really about feeding the skin and giving it the support it needs. LEDs are non-negotiable.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I'm looking around thinking, what else? There are so many things that we can incorporate. But like you said, as long as we're respecting the time in between the needling and those additional modalities and creating that program, then you're going to get a fantastic results.
Absolutely. And bringing back to ingredients, when you were talking about infusions, there are people out there that are using substitutes, right, for infusing and also for treating the skin, post-skin needling in terms of peels. What are some substitutes out there that are being used that probably shouldn't be used?
As a rule of thumb, we generally like to stay away from any of the AHAs, BHAs within that 10-day period. And it's not because that they're not, good options. It's just that we want to recommend practitioners to work with a more progressive approach. When you've microneedled the skin, I think what sometimes we can forget is that there is a micro wound there. And because the technology with needling, and especially with the Dermapen 4 at the moment, the downtime and the visual downtime is very minimal. So I think sometimes we can forget the skin is actually in recovery mode.
Yes.
At least for the first week, superficially. So when it comes to post peels and post treatments, we need to make sure we give that buffer time and then perhaps consider more gentler options like the enzymes.
Would you be using enzymes straight after the skin needling, as in post treatment on the day?
No. In my opinion, that came out as a flat out no. In my opinion, if you were going to consider performing a peel, enzymes would generally be done beforehand. With Dermapen, we are very lucky because we have a whole trialed and tested concept with a mandelic form of peel, and it's actually a combination of different ingredients that's not just exfoliating, it's infusing into the skin. But again, we're going back to the right ingredients in the right forms, in the right doses. So personally, unless that peel has been specifically created to be used in conjunction with needling, I would stay away from it. And it's all about control. So if you don't know how the skin is going to respond at the best of times, when you're going out of protocol, you run the risk of things going wrong.
Because there's a lot of talk about peels either pre or post skin needling now. It's having a bit of a, resurgence. Would you suggest pre or post the actual treatment on the day?
Look, it depends on the protocol and the system. I always say to go back to your needling provider, because if they have a system like Dermapen 4 does, where it's all trialed and tested formulations, then it's always best to stick with it.
I think that's an important message here, is that if you've got a skin needling provider that doesn't have those protocols, you really need to go back and ask them and make sure that you're doing things correctly. And that's another reason why you really need to go with a supplier or a manufacturer that has those protocols in place. And I think that's what's really outstanding with the Dermapen 4 is that is a plethora of options and protocols that you can follow. There's so many. How many do you have?
Oh, Stephanie, you put me on the spot because I don't even know a number, but I was actually looking into the clinician portal. So when you become a Dermapen partner, you have access to a whole Dermapen dedicated portal, and
it's huge.
It's huge. The amount of resources, imagery, protocols. There's protocols for every skin condition that you could consider, and that's on top of all the core training. We always come back to that, and working for INSKIN Cosmetics, we have the luxury of having access to, we've got different peels from different brands and different serums, but we are really true to the Dermapen 4 protocol because we know that safety is first and foremost and paramount, and that's what consumers are looking for. They need the confidence that what they are having microneedled or used on their skin pre and post or during that treatment is going to be safe and formulated for that.
And then especially for them to know what the outcomes are going to be. As a therapist, when you're consulting with your client, you want to have that confidence to know that you can achieve certain results, right?
I have a saying, Steph, that I talk about a lot in training. Just because you can, it doesn't mean you should.
Oh, I love that.
And I say it all the time. Just because you can put that on the skin in this treatment, or just because you think it will work, it doesn't mean you should.
The one thing that you love about therapists is they're able to play and experiment and, really tailor things to the individual. But you really need to step back and go, okay, what am I doing here? Because risks are a real thing. And also the lack of results is a real thing. And then you're obviously selling this whole system to your client in the hopes that it's going to work, and using a tried and tested protocol that does, absolutely will have those results. It's actually going to gain you favor with the client and longevity with that client.
Absolutely. And just with that, with treatments, the skin is already an organ that we have no real control over it when we think about it. At the best of times, when you look at even the change of season and stress, a skin can one day respond differently to a peel that it had, 4 weeks ago. So we already have that element of, not being able to control the skin. So when you start to push the boundaries, that control just, goes out the window. So it's really important that, as excited as we can be with all the amazing tools that we have in the industry, we still have to remember that we've got to work within our realm, within our boundaries. And, fine, you might, push the boundary a little bit, but stick with your protocols. You need to make sure that you work within those.
Training is the foundation of what we do, but sometimes we tend to be busy, we tend to be flat out, one treatment after another, one client after another, and the days and months go by. Tell us a little bit about INSKIN, because you're famous for your training. How important is keeping your skills up to date, retraining your staff, having refreshers? Tell us a little bit about the training that you receive at INSKIN.
Oh, I could talk about this for so long. Training is key, and I cannot stress it enough. With needling, I really, the training that we provide with Dermapen for, I really feel is at the top of the game. We have been providing needling training with Dermapen for many, many years now, and it's a really important part of being able to deliver a treatment. A lot of people feel that it's just a pen. All you're doing is running a pen over the skin, creating these little micro channels, and that's it. But for me, the practical component is probably the easiest part to teach a therapist, because we are already hands-on people. We already have that natural skill and ability. But the most important part of training is understanding the when, the why, the how often, why are you needling at this depth? Why are you needling every 2 to 4 weeks? When? How do you choose? So the training is a non-negotiable. We will not provide, partners with pens unless they commit to needling. You will not be certified unless you complete both the theory and then practical component. And once you've done that core training, it doesn't mean that's it. You've done it once, you never do it again. I always recommend, with any training with INSKIN, revisit at least once every 12 months. And I recommend that for any therapist. Just because you've done a product training once, it doesn't mean you won't pick up anything more the second or third time. Quite often when I have training classes, therapists who have seen my training once, twice, 3 times before, they still always say, wow, I can't believe how much more I picked up this time. So revisit. You're only as strong as what you can, make yourself. So whatever you put in is what you're going to get out.
It's such wise advice. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for telling us all about skin needling. I love this topic. I feel like I could talk about it all day. We'd love to have you back on the show again very soon. Thank you so much for all that wonderful information.
Thank you so much, Steph. Love coming on and chatting to you all about all these wonderful things to do with skin. And look forward to being on again.
Thank you.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Beauté by ABIC podcast, your online support community for the aesthetic and beauty industry. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay connected.